So first of all, a very warm welcome to everyone. Greetings of good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you are. I'm Álvaro Ma. I'm Impact Finance Manager in Aqua for All, and at the same time, I hold a second hat, which is being the head of the WASH AG, which is currently going to present its progress. Together with me as a speaker is Sachin Kumar, which is the consultant that has been working on the AG work, and is going to present today the results. I personally will be setting the scene and facilitating the session today. Again, this session is supposed to present the results of the research study that has been done for the WASH component of the session, and at the same time have the opportunity to get feedback and input both from AG members and also from the audience, so as to then finalize the research study that Sachin has produced. How the format of the session looks. There will be a setting the scene, which is happening now. Sachin will then do a presentation around 20-25 minutes, going over his work. And then after that, we will open the floor for the remaining of the time to have some questions and some input, comments, feedback, so as to boost or enhance the final product the Sachin is working on. Yeah, now maybe just before we start, to provide a little bit of context about the WASH AG. This initiative started over a year ago, where we first introduced the idea of creating this AG this action group with e-MFP. And as a consequence of that, we were invited to produce a workshop session in the European Microfinance Week of 2020, where it was one of the first touch points with many of the e-MFP members that were interested in this topic. And we managed to engage them, but at the same time get some initial feedback on what they needed. So that was the starting point. And then after some iterations, we were able to fine-tune a final, a more concrete table of contents on what the AG would focus on and what the scope would be. And then around June this year is that we managed to get approvals and budget and everything in place to start working. So that was a little bit about the process. And then in terms of content, just to clarify on what the AG is for people who are not so familiar with it, is we defined the strategic objective of this WASH AG as to be able to generate information, insights, and activities that would reduce the uncertainty or tackle the challenges faced by some impact investors or e-MFP members on the water and sanitation sector, and with the specific objective to be able to catalyze new investments into the sector in the short or medium term. And to be able to do this is that we defined the activities of the AG in threefold. The first activity was to generate an activity of knowledge sharing. And the concrete deliverable of this was to be able to produce a handbook on WASH for impact investors. And the sub-activities related to this were related to reviewing relevant literature, providing interviews, and also collecting data and trying to find insights or generate general knowledge, because many of the AG members that provided initial input said that maybe it was necessary to do this first before jumping into what we wanted to do as a second stage. In the second stage, a second activity and third activity was the idea to generate indicators, both at market level, but also at transaction level. And that is what will follow the handbook on WASH in terms of timeline. So today, Sachin will present what he has worked on, which is the activity number 1, and he will present the preliminary results of the handbook. And then in the new year, in 2022, is that activity 2 and activity 3 will kick in, where we will start working and developing all the trajectories related to creating indicators and benchmarks for WASH. at the level of market and at the level of transactions. So that's a little bit to give you an idea of the strategic objective, the activities, and the timeline related to the WASH AG. So now, with no further ado, I would like to give the floor to Sachin so that he can again provide an update on what he and the results of what he has done so far on the activity 1, which is related to the handbook on WASH. So Sachin, please, the floor is yours. Sachin, you're on mute.
That's the very first thing which I always forget. So thanks once again, Alvaro, for setting the context and the background. I mean, as the title says, handbook on WASH for impact investors. That very much clearly outlines the target market for this handbook. And I'm also going to briefly talk about why this need for such handbook was also felt, because there has been a lot of good work done by impact investors in WASH space. But in spite of that, there are a lot of white space, a lot of areas where impact investors need to really reach out. I mean, the idea was to provide those insights in terms of the size of the market, size of the problem, and how these problems can be converted into opportunities, with certainly some enablers, some factors keeping in mind. So that has been the overarching objective. I'll go gradually in terms of the chapters and how these chapters have been constructed. And I'll also share the key findings under each chapter. Certainly, I would request everyone to go through the handbook once this is out, but I'll try to give a teaser or kind of a reason for you to read the handbook. So here I go. I mean, so as I said, the objective of this research was to better help our impact investors to understand the WASH sector, those who have already ventured in this space or those who are planning to enter the WASH space, and also try to reduce uncertainties which have impacted the WASH space in terms of getting investments, new investments. Also to dispel those myths, those challenges which the impact investors community have felt. And at the same time, we have also seen how these challenges have been overcome in different contexts in different countries. So also try to gather those examples which could inspire the fraternity to go for more investments. So this all research findings have been compiled in a way to come out with a handbook, which can be a reference point for the impact investors and AG members, and so that they could use as a reference talk to take a decision for making adequate investment in the particular market, and what all factors they should really look for. So the way this handbook has been outlined will have largely 6 components. The first component is WASH overall. We have tried to give an overview to the WASH as a subject, and followed by that we have dispelled the value chains of. This has been one of the uncharted territory for a lot of investors, that how does the value chain look like. So we have also tried to define that. Again, followed by WASH SMEs and how WASH SMEs are working. What are the different business models? So I'll also share some key findings around WASH SME as a market. Global WASH market, and how big is the market at an international level, at a regional level. What are the challenges in that market? So I have also tried to share a few findings around that. WASH financing, and then what are the different challenges in the WASH, and how the challenges have been tackled by different stakeholders working in the WASH space, including impact investors. So let us start with the chapter 1. The chapter 1 largely covers the basic introduction about WASH, and I just wanted to clear here that we have largely covered about water, drinking water, safe drinking water, and sanitation facilities. Hygiene, for that matter, has not been covered in this handbook. So our research findings are largely focused around investing opportunities, investments done in drinking water as well as safe sanitation facilities. We have also discovered how besides SDG 6, which is directly linked with WASH, how other SDGs are linked with WASH SDG 6. So this will also help us how the SDG 6 is directly or indirectly impacting other SDG goals. So that is very, very important. Let me take you through the other components. Let us first look at the larger level problems. I won't really spend much time, but all of you would know that we have around 2 billion population having lack of, access to safe drinking water, around 3.6 billion population not having safely managed sanitation facilities, and of the total private finance which has been mobilized from 2012 to 2017, only 1.36% has gone into the WASH space. So certainly there has been challenges, but this also opens up a lot of space which we as an investor community need to understand how we can really tap the market, which is surrounded with so many problems, hence opportunities. As I said, SDG 6 is directly linked with WASH, and not only that, there are interdependence between SDG 6 and other SDGs. If I really take you through the direct linkages between SDG 6 and another SDGs, to name a few examples would be SDG 1, no poverty, good health and well-being, and SDG 3, zero hunger. So these are, I would say, the SDGs which are directly linked with SDG 6. As far as indirect linkages are concerned, I can take an example of quality education, gender equality. So how this not addressing the WASH impacts the quality education and gender equality. I'll take a couple of examples in the subsequent slides, how this is directly impacting. Please, just wanted to highlight here that whatever I am right now sharing it has been has been described in a greater detail in the handbook, which is in the making right now. So I'm just trying to give you a very overview of the key points which have been covered under each chapter. So as far as the dimensions are concerned, how these SDGs are linked with different SDGs has been defined in terms of environmental linkages, social and economic linkages between different SDGs. To give you one example, how the lack of sanitation facilities have impacted girls' ability to manage their periods which has impacted 23% of girls when they reach puberty have dropped out of school in India. One of the research findings which was shared in 1617 by Dasra has shown that correlation between lack of sanitation facilities and the school dropout. So this in turn result into SDG 4, which is about quality education, gender equality, and reduced inequalities under SDG 10. So in short, what I'm trying to say here is that if we address SDG 6, which is around access to safe drinking water and other sanitation facilities, this is essentially we are going to touch upon the other SDG targets. So this is how it is so important for us to work on WASH under SDG 6. Under the next chapter, which is on value chains of WASH, I think we really spent a good amount of time in terms of finding relevant value chains through the secondary research and discussion with some primary key stakeholders, is how, if we have to define value chains, how should this look like? And it was surprising for us that we couldn't find a very comprehensive value chains already outlined in publications. So I must thank the interviews that we have had with a couple of primary stakeholders, and we could come out with more described value chains, not only for drinking water, but separately for sanitation facilities. This chapter will have a lot of details around the different components of the WASH value chains and what are the different drivers, internal and external actors and drivers of WASH ecosystem. Please excuse me for the font size, because this value chain essentially tells us about the key components of value chains. This is about drinking water value chain. Which are the key actors under these value chain, and what are the key activities undertaken by these actors? If I really group all these key activities, I would group them under natural storage, production, consumption, and end of life. If I just quickly tell you about the key components of value chain, the drinking water value chain, it would start with source, extraction, treatment, transmission, market, consumers, and drainage. And just to name a couple of key actors in the value chain would be equipment product manufacturers, pipe, pump, monitoring and quality checking enterprises, then O&M entrepreneurs as well. So, I mean, this chapter will have all the details, component-wise details, how these components are important, which are the different activities undertaken, which are the key actors. Everything has been described in greater detail in this chapter. So I would urge everyone to go through the detailed version. Similarly, for sanitation value chain, we have done a similar mapping. So we basically first describe the key components of value chain, which starts with point of use, containment, emptying, transportation, treatment, waste to value, and disposal. And similarly, we have also defined key actors which are engaged in different part of the value chain, and what are the key activities undertaken by them. In the WASH SME business models, we have very clearly defined how these different SMEs are working, what part of the value chain they are addressing. This will help the reader to understand how different actors are impacting the different part of the value chain. Due to paucity of time, I'm not really taking you through each component of the value chain. So please excuse me for that. Now I'll take you through the key findings under WAS SME. So this chapter will talk about the different types of SMEs, what are their roles in WAS value chain, and the business models of some key SMEs that we could notice across Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, South Asia. So this chapter will have a lot of case studies followed by the business models of different SMEs under drinking water as well as sanitation. So need not to really re-emphasize that how SMEs play a very important role in creating the in the emerging economies. And the contribution of SMEs, I would say, starts when the public sector infrastructure just do not catch up with the demand of safely managed WASH services. We have had examples where these private SMEs have really played a great role in partnership with the public companies, public entities in providing WASH services to the target market. So we'll have those case studies also in subsequent slides, but just wanted to re-emphasize the role of SMEs, which really play in the WASH space and not only provide products, they also provide ample wide range of services throughout the value chain of WASH, I would say. And SMEs are often torchbearers of innovations. I mean, we have had different case studies which has shown that how different innovations have been done by these SMEs in partnership with impact investors and other stakeholders. SMEs are, complementing, not, they are not rather competitor to the public sector infrastructure, but they have been complementing rather to the public sector infrastructure under the PPP model. So the handbook will have quite a few case studies talking about the PPP model as well. Let me just take you through a couple of business models just to re-emphasize that how we have mapped the business models, not only on their key services, but also the value chain. So for example, DLO Haiti address the market and consumers part of the value chain. If you really look below, it says extraction, treatment, transmission, market, and consumers. And the colored one shows which part of the value chain this organization is addressing. So this will help the reader to understand. For example, DLO Haiti, they provide decentralized water. They have essentially decentralized water treatment kiosk, and they have this kiosk at the retail level up to 500 meters, and they are providing delivery and distribution up to 5 kilometers, and they have only distribution model which takes them to 25 kilometers. So, and they are operated by local entrepreneurs. They have pay-per-use revenue model. So, I mean, there are similar case studies in the WAS SME chapter, which will talk about how different SMEs are addressing which components of the value chain. Same with Subsina. I mean, have a similar example coming out of related to sanitation facilities. So this almost gives a similar structure of the the information that we spoke about. Now I'll talk about the next chapter, which is on global wash market and challenges. This chapter covers global wash economy. I mean, how big is the demand and supply side of the story? What are the factors which is affecting wash market? And what are the different myths and biases in financing wash? And based on our secondary research, we also supplemented the findings through our primary interviews with a couple of, quite a few key stakeholders from the investor community. So this chapter essentially covers all these key points. We are aware that there's annual demand for 1.12 trillion for investment in the wash space for providing safe wash services. And currently there is a current source of funding which only covers 16% of the new infrastructure needs. At the same time, in emerging economy, globally, there are around 55 to 68% of SMEs which are not served or underserved by the financial institutions. So that itself shows challenge as well as the opportunity for tapping or for serving the market, the SME market. A research report published by Stanchart also estimated about USD 1.2 trillion of WAS investment requirement by 2030 in emerging markets. So this chapter also talks about what are the different investment opportunities within the WAS space. So I'll not get into the details, but that's the large level picture. Just wanted our members to have the attention on. This is very interesting. I mean, a lot of challenges or biases which we could find out based on the research and also in discussion with the stakeholders. To name a few myths or challenges are people do not demand improved wash services. This is a kind of a misperception. There's no enough finance to solve sanitation issues. Sanitation is a business with low profit margin. So in this chapter, we have tried to address all these myths, all these challenges, and at the same time, we have shared examples how these challenges have been addressed in some part or the other part of the world, so that the investor community could get inspiration from, talk to those best practices and see how these challenges can be addressed. Enterprises serving BOP are mainly micro firms. Public sector is only active in WAS financing. Water is a public subject. Why investors should come into this? But even for the public entities, they have limited resources, right? So they certainly need investments from the private entities, from the impact investors. They also have partnered with impact investors in quite a few countries to serve the bottom of pyramid WAS services. So a lot of case studies, a lot of examples, but these are the large level myths that we could come across during the research.
Sachin, maybe here, before we go into the section of WASH financing and tackling the challenges of WASH, we're almost over the half of the presentation. I think it's maybe a good moment to have see if there's some questions, because you're covering a lot of material, and also to give you some breathing time, because you're so maybe it's a good moment to see if related to what Sachin has presented so far, we have already some relevant questions or also some feedback comments that could help us in even fine-tuning the final product of this research. So please, via the chat, or even better, if you can unmute yourself and ask the questions or the comments, or please feel free. This is the moment to do so. We would like to spend 5, max 10 minutes and then move forward with the rest of the presentation.
I'm ready. I'm ready for the question.
Yeah, sometimes you need to give a little bit of time. Silence can be uncomfortable, but sometimes people will speak after a bit, so don't worry so much. There we have one question, for instance, from Lucia. Is financing from local banks included in the value chain?
Yes, it is. It is. We have covered examples of microfinance companies and some banks which have ventured into financing, funding towards value chain.
Very good. She's clarifying, meaning local FI financing WASH SMEs. Local FIs financing WASH SMEs. The FIs that the finance WASH SMEs have been included in the value chain. That's what she's asking. Yeah.
Not really, because this value chain was largely about the players which are working on the service delivery side, right? So product manufacturing or service delivery. So I mean, within the value chain, the financial actors have not been outlined, but the case studies about the financial institutions which are catering to the SMEs, or they are catering to the individual households through in partnership with microfinance companies or financial institutions, have been covered.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, she's happy with the answer. Got it. Thanks. Maybe one question from my side to trigger a little bit the conversation. From your analysis on the value chain, Sachin, and from the interviews that you had with some of the players, stakeholders, did you manage to identify where maybe the bigger opportunities were in the value chains, either for water or for sanitation, or for instance, where is it that they're currently focusing more in terms of the value chain for financing?
So while we were mapping out the value chain actors and the components, there were some areas which we could find that that is throwing up a lot of opportunity. For example, providing sanitation facilities. I mean, there's once these sanitation facilities are installed, the hardware installed, there's a lot of opportunity for operations and maintenance, O&M. And where there are a few players which have really come up with the business model for providing regular after sales services, I would say. So yeah, I mean, so there are such certain case studies which have covered.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I mean, see, the handbook, I would say, I wouldn't call it an academic handbook. It is more of a practitioner's handbook. So if you really go through, this will trigger a lot of thought process for the investor community, for the impact investors. That I mean, the way the investor community would like to get the queries answered, we have tried to cover all the possible questions and the answers thereof in the hand.
Yeah, very clear. Thanks, Sachin. There's a question from Benedict Godefroud. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. In the business models that you analyzed, what is the importance of partnerships with public authorities, if any?
I mean, we came across, I mean, this does play a very important role. I mean, when it comes down to revenue sharing, or even if it comes down to blended finance, where public entities have provided consistent, loans or funding facilities to such value chain players. So it does impact, or rather positively or negatively. I mean, if the money doesn't come on time, but we have had examples where the public entities, the government entities, have really acted as an enabler, and it's not only the target market have got benefit out of this PPP partnership, but also the government entities. they used to have a very irregular funds. I mean, tariffs coming from the target market, the bottom of pyramid clients, the poor clients. But with the private partnership, they have been able to streamline the payment behavior of payment, regular payments. So yeah, I mean, there have been instances of such joint partnership. Yeah.
Is that yeah? I was going to ask if you were happy with the answer or you had follow-up questions. Good. She seems to be happy. Okay. Maybe from my side, Sachin, on the slide 16, where, well, not, I don't know if it's 16, but the slide where you show the myths, surrounding the sector in terms of difficulties or challenges. You mentioned several. Maybe just have you been able to rank this in terms of importance? Which are the most difficult ones for the impact investors, or is this you haven't done a ranking actually at this stage?
No such ranking has been done, because we felt that all the challenges are of equal importance, because the ranking or the criticality of those issues would vary from country to country because of the varying macroeconomic conditions. But what we have done, that we have tried to answer those challenges with the innovations that we could notice in one part of the country or another part of the country, right? So in one region or another region. So we have tried to give a positive twist rather just leaving those challenges unaddressed. So wherever possible, where we could find out solution to those questions or challenges or biases, we have given an answer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. There's a question from Marco Bianchi. Thanks, Sachin. I have a question too. What are the connections with the energy supply value chain? Is the supply of a combination of energy and water a feasible business model for SMEs?
That's a really good question, Marco, and thanks indeed for asking it. To answer your question, honestly, we could not really connect the dots between the energy supply value chain and the WAS SMEs, but this is something that we could explore, and maybe this line of research or maybe future research. But that's a good question indeed.
Yeah, maybe something to consider for the next sections or future parts of the elaborations. Okay, thanks. Maybe one last question from my side on the same slide on the myths. You mentioned at the top a major reason for lack of finance mobilization in the wax sector is the absence of sector-specific information in the public domain. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that, please?
So I was just trying to think as an investor. So as an investor, let's say if I want to enter India or maybe Bangladesh, so first I would like to have a macro level picture. When I say macro level picture, it will be the perspective of government towards WASH. Is there any enabling law for investment in WASH? What has been the government investment? What is the demand supply gap? So we could come across a couple of case studies or countries where such macro level mapping has been done by a third party or by a reputed agency. But if I really see the other countries, I mean, majority of countries have not been really covered. There was a study where 19 countries were mapped at macro factors, which would help the investor to take the call at the higher level, whether to invest in that country or not. Second question, which I could sort of realize is putting impact investors in sort of a kind of a dilly-dally situation, is that how big is the market? I mean, although there have been so many global studies, if I want to invest in a particular country, I mean, there are very few countries where such studies have been done. Really size the market, really look for the potential SMEs, I mean, small and medium enterprises. So these questions are yet to be answered. So, I mean, whosoever, I mean, impact investor community, if they want to really take it up, I mean, this is something which they really need to get the answer for. And more importantly, how to reach out to these SMEs, whether there is a need for reaching out directly or whether there can be an aggregated model. There can be an intermediary in the form of financial institution or in the form of maybe some commerce platform. some platform where such SMEs have been aggregated. So I mean, we really need to find innovative answers to these kind of larger level questions.
Yeah, I see. Thank you, Sachin. I think now we can, it's a good moment to continue. And for the last part of the presentation, in an ideal world, Sachin, if you would manage to do it in around 10, 12 minutes, that would be perfect. So let's try to aim for that. Yeah, to have some time at the end.
Thanks, Alvaro. So the chapter 5 basically talks about the financing gaps and what is the importance of investments in WASH and financing to two different ways. I mean, directly to if the impact investors want to reach out to individual households needs in WASH related matters, then how they have been able to do that in partnership with microfinance companies, banks, or other financial institutions, and how they have been able to reach out to and what are the different finance instruments that have been. So this chapter will have a lot of details around these. I'll go to the next slide. Excuse me for the delay. Yeah. So I mean, this is a very classic iceberg, impact, I would say, effect of our understanding about WASH ecosystem. When we see WASH ecosystem, we somehow have a problem of systems blindness, where we are able to only see the tangibles, which is in the form of infrastructure, right? Without looking at the supporting systems or without looking for the needs of operations and maintenance. When the infrastructure is built, and who's going to take care of those infrastructure? Will this be public bodies? Will this be private entities? Are there business model? Are there opportunities for these operations and maintenance? So I would always urge this graph basically tries to help us to look beyond capital expenditure and minor maintenance. I mean, there's a hell lot of opportunity for major maintenance, whether it is about drinking water facilities or about sanitation amenities, right? So, and it is also equally important to also understand this problem, this WASH as an ecosystem, not as just looking at the visibles, right? Tangibles. We need to equally give emphasis on regulation, policy, monitoring, and people which are working in the WASH. With public sectors, I mean, relatively sluggish willingness to change, private sector can act as a catalyst, right? I mean, in myths we have noticed that there's a lot of view that water or sanitation is largely the public good, so why there should be private investments? But we have seen that the public entities have been really done a great job, but in order to really sustain that good job, they really need to partner with the private entity, the impact investors, the impact ministers, the other stakeholders. So private sector certainly has a very big role to play in terms of doing innovations, in terms of trying to find innovative solutions along with the private public finance. So to name a few constraints which private investors have faced is lack of concrete policy and regulation by government. As I said, there are some countries which have done a good job, but there are still a few target countries, emerging economies, which have not been able to spell out very clearly. WASH remains a political issue in many developing countries. So that somehow works as a deterrent that if it is a political matter, maybe my business model will be impacted, as we have seen the microfinance business model getting impacted because of the political issue. Lack of vision by government bodies to attract private finance, operational efficiency of service providers. So, I mean, assessment of business models of SMEs, because they are not, ample, I would say, due diligence, which would have evolved for evaluating SMEs. So there is a lot of opportunity in terms of designing such models. I'll just give one example where around 19 countries were, mapped, which would essentially help any impact investors to, first look at it before they enter the country, right? So, and these ratings were done on the broader 7-8 criteria, namely institutional and legal framework, non-revenue water ratio, cost recovery ratio, benchmarking of service providers, bond market, domestic bank financing to watch. So, I mean, such studies need to be really, done on a regular basis and at a larger scale. So, I mean, I'm just giving one example which we could come across during the secondary research, and this is of 2016. Certainly, I mean, we would like to have more latest reports and more regular such studies that would help the investor community to enter the market, to decide before they enter the market, particular country, right? So, yeah. And, so, I mean, we have seen that there are two ways to reach out to address the wash services, and one model is to partner with the microfinance companies or financial institutions to address the wash level, service demands at the individual households. So, at the individual households level, MFIs, FIs, cooperatives, other form of financial institutions have been very effective. And there, the instruments of watch financing have been largely, ranging from self-financing to equity, quasi-equity, result-based financing, debt grants. So, I mean, all combinations have been really used in this space. As far as SMEs are concerned, I think this is WASH SMEs is still a very, at a very nascent stage, I would say. There has been experiments, I would say, or some pilots being done here and there, maybe by Water Equity, Aqua for All, Incofin, but there is a lot of opportunity to look for, WASH SME as a big market, and also look for the channels to reach out to those SMEs. Maybe these financial institutions could be one channel. We need to look for other aggregated models which could help these financial institutions, these impact investors community to reach out to the target market. Like education sector or any other impact investment space, WASH space has also been, has witnessed the blended finance model, which has helped to, draw the impact-driven financial investment. So, this is certainly one space where impact investors would like to know more about it, how this has really worked across different countries. And this chapter does cover a few case studies where the blended finance model has been used, how this guarantees concessional, capital grant based of loan funded technical assistance has been used to increase efficiency of the WASH SMEs, and how public-private partnership have worked in this blended finance ecosystem. So this chapter is dedicated, does cover some elements on blended finance. Now I'll go to the last chapter, which is about tackling the challenges. So this chapter basically talks about what are the different challenges which one can foresee in WASH space, and what are the ways to fill those gaps, WASH financing, and increase investments, and what are the case studies of different innovative solutions which we could notice during the research. As I said, the problem is big. There are a lot of larger issues which need to be addressed, but hence we need to have the solutions. So although there are problems, there are challenges in one country, but there are innovations which would have happened in the neighboring countries, or maybe in the same country. So we have been able to just relate all those solutions which we could notice, which address the different kind of challenges, right? From how do you ensure the timely repayments, how digital way of repayments have been able to successful, how innovative tariff systems have worked in favor of public-private partnerships, how cross-subsidizing have happened. So this chapter essentially talks about different scenarios, different case studies, which have shown solutions, innovative solutions to the different set of challenges. So this chapter is essentially devoted for that. And in addition to this chapter, we have also created kind of a commonly used terminology in WASH sector, so that the impact investors could get familiar with those trade language or the sector language. So there is a separate commonly used terminology, I would say subchapter after this last chapter. With this, I'll take a pause, and thanks for being really patient. Now I'll open the floor for question answers.
Thank you, Sachin. So please, again, we have around 10 minutes till the end of the session. So if you have any questions, feedback, comments, please feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask it directly, please. There's a question from Lucia. Thanks a lot, Sachin. From your research, what do you think may be a minimum size of SME, minimum investment size, minimum compliance criteria that may be recognized as the threshold for an international impact investor as opposed to a local financial institution to make sense?
I mean, good question. At the same time, very difficult to answer because these all criteria would vary from one region to another region, and we really could not come across any kind of benchmarking or kind of a data which would help us answer this question. But for the financial institutions to make sense to make investment in SME, I just want to highlight here that most of the financial institutions do have a product for SME financing, right? But there is no exclusive subcategory defined for WAS SME. So rather, I would say that that's the area where we would like to have more focus on. I mean, if we really work with these financial institutions and banks, I mean, we really need to do more of a sensitization and help them understand how big is the market so that they could design exclusive financial solutions and products for WAS SME. As we have seen in case of education sector. I mean, education sector used to be part of SME, but now we have seen quite a few financial institutions having an exclusive product for education institutions, full improvement loan for that matter under SME. So I strongly see that there is a need, and there has been cases where financial institutions have designed exclusive products for WAS SME. So I want to give more of an indirect answer to your question, not direct answer.
Mm-hmm. And maybe take it as well, instead of maybe tackling it as a question, since it seems difficult to answer, we could also take it as feedback in terms of, or as a valuable comment to see what we can do with it, if any, before, with the research that you've done already, and see if we can try to answer it by the end of the research, or if it needs to be put aside for following research, of course, Yeah. Thank you, Lucia, for that.
Thanks indeed. Yeah.
Any questions, comments, feedback, please, at this stage?
I must say, Lucia, these are very good questions. I may not have answered your question directly, but we have taken note of it.
Well, Lucia seems to be, is thanking you, and she says it's very interesting. And then she asks, how about collateral? But I don't fully understand the question. So I don't know, Lucia.
Apologies, Alvaro. Yes, Sachin, maybe easier by speaking. This is extremely interesting, and just brainstorming with you. We don't need to find all the answers today, but I was curious when you made the very good point that WASH is one of those sectors where it may be appropriate to have specific methodologies for financing rather than generic SME ones. Have you already seen emerging specific challenges when an international impact investor or a local financial institution is interested in financing WASH SMEs that potentially have to do with collateral? Or no, there's no difference with other sectors and it's always the same story?
I think, no, certainly the nature of collateral would vary in case of WASH SME, right? So, in case of, let's say, sanitation facilities which have been extended to the institutions, one SME is serving the other SME's, B2B business model. In case of those, certainly at a given loan size, fund size, the role of collateral comes to the picture. and it does have a value. And this is certainly one of the evaluation criteria for giving loan, right? So, I mean, this does hold good in case of lending to SME sector as well. But if you really ask me in terms of the examples that we could notice, we had just some examples where the investing in WAS SME is emerging as one of the promising sectors. Now investors are seriously looking at it as a business opportunity as well. But this is yet to get more clarity in terms of how they are doing it, what is the modus operandi. I mean, how the due diligence is different from investing through microfinance companies and finance institutions. So I mean, certainly, I mean, these questions need to be really answered more granularly, I would say, in close coordination and close discussion with the investors community.
Yeah, and I think in general, I think assessing the value, the aspect of collateral in WASH SME financing is something that I think it hasn't been covered specifically, but that again can be written down for further exploration, because at least from what I've seen in Aqua for All, at least on average, I've seen that it is not always easy to have collateral in WASH SMEs compared to maybe normal SMEs because of the type of assets that they hold. So that's this. I think it's a valuable question from Lucia's side to try to inquire on that, if that's the case on a broad scale, or if it's actually not the case. So I think it's a valuable point to note it.
I just want to highlight 3 important points, and certainly that would perhaps fall into the area of the research. Is one is the mapping of these WAS SMEs at a country and the regional level. We have seen instances where the government of a particular country has, when they do the census of SME, right, every maybe 5 years, 6 years down the line, they also have WAS as one of the line item of the SME. So they have defined SMEs under education, WAS, healthcare, other likewise, and they do the census on a regular basis. I mean, such practices would certainly help the investors community to understand. So it's also requires to work with different stakeholders, in the given country, to understand the size and the potential investors in WAS SME. I also felt that there's a greater need for sensitizing FI, MFI banks for looking at WAS SME as an exclusive SME product, so that they could do the evaluation in a different way, because this is a separate market altogether. So I mean, it's very important to engage closer with them and see how they can also aggregate the demand, because they are already operational, they're already working in different part of the countries. And I also see the role of associations and network. I mean, how they can help the investors community to come closer with the larger, with smaller or medium enterprises working in WAS SMEs. So these platforms essentially also interact a lot with these SMEs, right? So I mean, water, toilet, I mean, there are organizations like quite a Toilet Board Coalition or Indian Coalition of Sanitation, Sustainable Sanitation Alliance, Water Toilet Organization. There are several such organizations which have been working for a good time. So I mean, having them on board in discussion for understanding the market, making them closer to the WAS SME segment will be very, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sachin. We have time for maybe one more question or two, depending on the time. I have one question. Maybe on the last slide, Sachin, where you explain about that there are solutions that exist for the challenges, and that in chapter 6 of the handbook, there are some case studies of successful demonstrations. Maybe could you briefly elaborate on one of these, on a case study, or very quickly on the broad strokes of how this works?
So yeah, I mean, I came across one case study on the public-private partnership model, where I think Gates Foundation provided some funding support to the public utility companies at Udaipur, Rajasthan, and that sort of worked under the blended finance model, where the government also was playing an active role. They also provided a concessional, loan to the private entity, so that they could provide these sanitation services to the urban localities. So I mean, and that's on a revenue sharing model. So it really helps to improve the efficiency of the public utilities, which they were not able to do, to improve the revenue in terms of getting timely collections from the beneficiary, I mean, from the user of those services. So such models have been not only noticed in India, even in Mozambique, there was an innovative water tariff model. Same in case of Jamaica Credit Enhancements Facility. So I think we could come across quite a few case studies which have been documented in the handbook. I'm not able to recall everyone. I mean, all the examples, but these are the key examples that I could remember.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking for. So yeah, just one or two. So that's perfect, Sachin. Okay, well, I think given the time, I would like to wrap up at this stage. First of all, Sachin, thank you very much for the elaborate presentation and all the work that you've done. And yes, thanks to everyone in the call for participating, for the input and the questions. Maybe just to clarify, share on the next steps, we will now try to integrate some of the feedback got here, some of the questions given here, but at the same time, we will reach out privately to the AG members to provide additional feedback on the handbook if there's any, to then finalize it and then be able to publish it and share it. Then the action group doesn't finish because, again, as mentioned at the introduction, we have activity 2 and activity 3 that will follow in the new year, in 2022. There we will kickstart the trajectory where we will explore indicators and, if possible, benchmarks to try to see to what extent we can actually align between investors and investees in speaking a common language on what we want to measure, both at impact level, but also financially or operationally or in terms of water indicators. So we want to develop a list of indicators both at transaction level, individual level, but also at market level to see and to be able to speak a common language around them between investees and investors. So that's the work that will follow the AG. So if at some point you're interested in for people who are not participating yet, are interested in joining, please feel free to reach out to me or to Joanna from e-MFP so that we can see what we can do together. So that's from my side. I would like to thank you for your participation and until the next time.
Thanks once again, and I mean, thanks for sharing your inputs. Thanks, Alvaro, for giving this opportunity.
Excellent. Have a nice rest of the day. Bye-bye.